Thank you for staying with us. Nigerians are still reacting to the suspension and subsequent arrest of the former Central Bank of Nigeria Governor Godwin Emefiele following some allegations leveled against him. Earlier this month, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu had ordered his immediate suspension as the CBN governor to allow for an investigation of his office and the planned reforms in the financial sector. The president has now revealed reasons for his action in an interactive session with Nigerians residing in France and neighboring countries. President Tinubu disclosed that the financial system was rotten under Emefiele. He also said that many of those living outside the country were unable to send money to their parents and relatives due to the multiple exchange rates. It has been recorded that under Emefiele's 9-year reign, the naira suffered massive depreciation against the dollar. Well, joining us now via Zoom is Chair, Haida Resource Center, Olariwaju Suraju. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Right. Now, let's get your reaction to the president saying that the system, the financial system under Godwin Emefiele was rotten. What were your impressions of that statement?
Well, I think that is just a simple statement of fact, and most Nigerians have been victims of several, I think I can simply say, anomalies that was witnessed under the CBN governorship of Mr. Godwin Emefiele. How the government of Buhari that actually touted itself to be a government of anti-corruption could tolerate such a man in that office for that long, of the 8 years, even though Emefieles was inherited from the previous regime. Emefieles was, and also the CBN was fingered in the several nefarious activities bordering on money laundering and financial atrocities and crimes under the government of Jonathan. How the government of Buhari succeeded in retaining him for that period was what quite a number of us found very difficult to understand, and also at the same time live with. But it also clearly showed with some of the things that eventually happened under Buhari with quite a number of his ministers and aides, that it was not totally different with that regime between that of Buhari and that of Jonathan in terms of what would amount later and also reveal to have been monumental also corruption under that regime. So what the president has said is totally correct in terms of looking at the monetary policy, the quite very damning activities of Emefieles, unprecedented damning activities of Emefieles, of dabbling into politics, which was totally illegal, and the use of the judicial system, and also quite a number of lawyers. I mean, senior lawyers are usually always available. A majority of them for many of these atrocities, provided the prices are right, and also the misnomer in many of the programs where the CBN practically became almost the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Tourism, CBN directly renovating the National Theatre, Anchor Borrower program. And unlike the previous governorship that we've had at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Emefieles was more feasible in the media than quite a number of newscasters. And that was not the kind of thing that you expect of a responsible and also performing CBN.
The angle where you touched them. But then the Central Bank of Nigeria plays very crucial role in monetary policy, just like you said, and then the country's economic stability. So how do you think the suspension of former Governor Godwin Emefiele has impacted bank operations and, of course, the overall economy, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's still some shortcoming on the part of the government. What would have been most appropriate for some of us would be for the government to come out clearly on what is supposed to be is monetary and financial policy, which quite a number of us would not expect, Emefiele to feel in any way, to fit properly into any responsible, reasonable, and also sustainable financial and monetary policy of any government. And at that point, it will be very easy for people to flow with it and also understand what the government is doing or planning to do, and also work with the government. It is not only just the duty or responsibility of government to deal with such very important policy within the system if you want to revive the economy. There's no doubting the fact that the CBN of Emefiele has totally also grounded, the economy of the country. The monetary and financial policy of the CBN has adversely affected even the capacity of the private sector to operate effectively. It has encouraged the unprecedented devaluation of the naira, which is just traceable to mere hoarding of dollars. Not that the economy was not working, but the dollarization of the economy, and at the same time, the rant-ripping racketeering that was sustained by Emefiele through political gratification of those considered to be very important to his retainership of the office as the governor of Central Bank, has adversely affected the economy. And that you can see also with the amount of money that was invested in his presidential ambition, which was aborted. Just like quite a number of us in the civil society initially supported, the currency change policy. And this was not the first time that you find that from the civil society. We also supported initially when the government of Obasanjo was really supporting the democratization of the state's arms of government. And you had the state houses of assembly rising up to the expectation to not only query the governors and even impeach some of those governors that were accused of corruption, just like you had in Ekiti, until when we saw that it became a political tool used by the president, by the then president Obasanjo, to remove those that were considered not to be playing to the whims and caprices of their godfathers, like you had with Ladoja, and you can find fewer numbers of parliamentarians impeaching the governor. It was at that point that we turned around and said, no, this is just actually becoming a political thing. It was the same thing with the currency change, where we felt that, the monetization of the electoral process was becoming also a threat to our democracy and the free, fair, and credible electoral process in the country, until it became clear that Emefiele had and some of his co-travelers had a complete different agenda, at variance with what we were thinking, and it was inflicting untold hardship on many of the citizens, and there was really no replacement of the new currency for the old one. So it was clear that this was then not actually conceived to achieve that purpose of really dealing with the monetization of the electoral process, and also at the same time the implication of it for the economy and the ordinary man on the street. So his removal, definitely for many of us, and I'm sure for Nigerians, it is nothing short of a commendable effort, but it is still falling short of what exactly is the agenda of the government. Where are we heading? Where are the roles of the private sector, the citizens, and other stakeholders? It is not just a government decision that would be implemented by just the government by itself.
Now, there's also the matter of the lack of independence. There are those who have said that for every decision Emefiele made, he always alluded to the president going to seek the consent of the president at the time for a go-ahead with whatever decision he put forward or he was going to make. So are we saying that former President Buhari is also complicit with regards to the situation on the ground?
Well, either it goes to sought the approval of the president or otherwise. The president is vicariously liable for the misaction and also infraction of his appointees. So he takes responsibility, except where he's able to come out openly to dissociate himself from such an action, and or even go the extra mile of relieving such an appointee of their duty and office. That is only when you can absolve such president or appointer from that liability of the action of his appointees. And actually, Buhari also showed that by doing that, by actually dissociating himself from the attempt by Emefiele to disobey the court order that mandated him to allow the operation of the old currency. And that was at the point that he made a turn back. So by extension, the ones that Buhari failed to dissociate himself from means that he actually endorsed those actions. But unfortunately, the fact is that these are not the conception of Buhari. I mean, that was why he thought he must have appointed people with the ground knowledge, considering his own insufficient knowledge of the area and many of those areas as well. And unfortunately, this was a government that you had quite a number of compromised, aides of the president, the attorney general, the SAs, the PAs of the president were not actually working in the interest of the president or the country, but rather in the interest of their pockets. So they failed in that responsibility to assist the president in understanding many of the issues correctly. So there's no doubt in the fact that that was also why Emefieles needs to also make it public that he got the approval of the president, because he knows that many of those activities, actions, and decisions are not in tune with the expectation of the public. So he only just needs the president at every point in time to give some measure of credibility to his decisions or actions that are considered to be antithetical to what would be expected of his office as the CBN governor. I mean, we were expecting more monetary and financial policies from the CBN, and which was supposed to be the primary responsibility of the CBN. But that really does not attract, enough patronage for the office of the CBN governor. And that does not also give him the opportunity to buy patronage from the power brokers around the presidency. So he needed all forms of different programs, that would give him that feasibility to gratify enough and so many other people beyond just staying in the background and also operating around policies more than programs.
Well, unfortunately, former President Buhari tried to exonerate himself, by throwing former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Emefiele, under the bus, saying that he was convinced that that was the best, policy, the coloring of the naira, in street parlance, as they say. But then, what were some notable achievements? Because it does appear that we talk more about, things that he did, somewhat not going, down well with Nigerians. But what were the achievements or challenges faced by the Central Bank of Nigeria? And then, the suspension of the former governor, how would it, impact the ongoing initiatives and policies that the central bank, central bank's trajectory has been on?
Unfortunately, and I would really be in this situation in the position almost to disappoint that I don't have any record, and maybe I might not be also well informed. I don't have any record of any positive achievement that I can attribute to Emefiele and his days in office as the CBN governor. Not for me. I don't know. The effective, impactful, and successful implementation of the Naira change, the currency change, would have possibly be the one and only. And I also said that also publicly on some of the interviews that I granted during the period, that for me would have been the greatest achievement of Emefiele in curbing, the excessive monetization of the electoral policy, and also saving the Naira from the free fall, and also the hoarding of quite a number of the political office holders. But unfortunately, that was also bungled. So for me, I can't see any positive, or remarkable impact of Emefiele's regime as the CBN governor. Rather, we had the worst experience, and we have very horrible, history to be told about Emefiele as the CBN governor of Nigeria. His incarceration, for me, is unfortunate that the government is yet to realize that it is gradually working itself into an own goal. There's no justification and basis to have him detained for this period. And the same thing goes to the suspended or even detained chairman of the EFCC. The government can afford to run against the rule of law. If there are already established findings to necessitate their prosecution, that should be processed with speed. We can't afford a government that would operate like a military regime. No, that would not in any way be condoned by many of us in the civil society and citizens of Nigeria, because it could be anybody. Because Emefieles is unpopular with the masses, is not sufficient for his right to impartial, free, and also independent trial to be abridged by the government. So for that reason,
we hold him to account if he is not to be arrested, because recall the DSS claims that he was about leaving the country when they nabbed him. So how could we have brought him or hold him to account? How do we do that?
No, it's very easy. It's very possible. That is all DSS. Unfortunately, the DSS, according to even the court of law, the jurisprudence is that DSS does not have the power to prosecute people in court. So that rests with the police and other law enforcement agencies. The DSS could have, through the police or any other law enforcement agencies, approach the court to obtain the necessary order of court to have him detained if that is necessary. And it is very much possible. For that is where the court is there. It is not allowed in the law. The law gives a maximum period for which anybody can be detained by the law enforcement agencies, and we can't in any way allow that to be operated. Either the fact that an attempt was made to elope from the country is sufficient for the court to refuse granting him bail, but then he would be detained under the order of the court. And that is what I expect the government to do immediately. The fact that we don't have an attorney general does not mean that we don't have the permanent secretary and also the solicitor general at the federal Ministry of Justice that would have done the necessary. And I would advise that the government should go ahead and do that as soon as possible. In terms of the policy, there's no other way, and that is also very important, that it could be removed from office, going by the provision of the CBN Act on how it should be removed. It could also be asked to tender his resignation letter, considering that it's not going to fit into the financial policy and other policy of the government, which I said that from the beginning, that we're yet to actually see that, to understand who fits in and who doesn't fit into such agenda of the government. And then he could, on the basis of that, be asked to tender his resignation letter, and the appropriate, investigation can be conducted. And the other point for me is I'm not sure how much of competence is the DSS able to muster in terms of investigating this. So there are those investigators that are properly trained within EFCC and ICPC that can deal with financial crimes and also economic crimes, an issue of corruption. I'm not sure DSS is in that position. So it is important within the current government that the appointees of the government, and the only thing I can see for now with quite a number of them, is that they seem to still be basking in the euphoria and the joy of their appointment, that they are yet to actually sit down to support the president in terms of arranging, organizing, and coordinating some of these things. There should be somebody in the government that should focus on coordinating this, and maybe I would assume that the new National Security Advisor, who's just been appointed and also had this unimpeachable experience in dealing with the issue of corruption and financial crimes, we get to work immediately to actually coordinate the security agencies and the anti-corruption institutions to put the government on track. Otherwise, it is very easy and very much possible for government to actually lose track in dealing with the myriads of cases that we have around the issue of corruption and insecurity.
Looking at the president's decision to suspend Godwin Emefiele, actually, we saw a jubilant populace. They threw their weight behind it because it was as if he offended the entire nation. But then some do not agree. They believe that it was political and then, all of that. But then, are there any potential risks or uncertainties associated with his suspension? And if any, how can it be mitigated to ensure stability and investors' confidence? How are they receiving this?
And unfortunately, there's no decision that will be taken by a politician that will not also be political. So as far as I am concerned, decisions would have to be taken. The ultimate concern for me is the benefit to the generality of the populace. So it is not just sufficient for me. I mean, politicians will take decisions even when it's in sometimes tandem with the wishes of the people. It is also having some political undertone and political, consideration for the politicians when they take those decisions. So sometimes they align with the wishes of the generality of the populace and citizens, and sometimes it doesn't work with the thinking and wishes of the people. So, but it's most important and clear that, like you rightly observed, this was one of those decisions that resonated clearly with Nigerians. It's not just about the currency change thing. I mean, the audacity of Emefiele to defy the office of the CBN governor by going into politics and aspiring to contest an election without even resigning from that office. It is more than sufficient enough for him to actually also be prosecuted post office for that action. It is not to be allowed, for the purpose and of posterity and the future, that such an action should be ignored by the government and allowed to become a tradition, because it doesn't take time for people also in Nigeria to emulate some of these very negative action of public office holders. And for me, there are more than enough grounds to have Emefiele answer to several charges in court, and how much that would also deal with the issue of policy and agenda of the government is yet to be seen. Like I said, because you can only speak to what is available. Yeah, the whole effort at removing the disparity between the official and the unofficial exchange rate of Naira, that is also something to also be commended. But unfortunately, it is not going to achieve the purpose in its isolation. It is not the real end that we should target. It's a means to achieving an end. And that would really mean that there must be sufficient effort at reviving the economy, where we would have more attraction of dollars to the country, and also the demand for naira by people will also be importing locally produced materials and finished goods from Nigeria that would allow for the naira to start also urgently competing favorably with the currency. Without that, in no time, that disparity will find its way back. If every naira is made to chase the dollar, then it will still be black market operations that would limit the capacity of the government to control the value of the naira, and would compel the exporters, the importers, the local importers of external raw materials and finished goods to be chasing dollar through the black market. And that is all you need to continue the valuation of naira. And that can actually bring even the value worse than we have it before this merger of the official and unofficial, value of the naira. And the government needs to rise up, because unfortunately what you have is that a system that has been pervaded with quite a number of, I would want to just classify a number of them as criminals. And they've amassed so much wealth that they're kind of capable of, subverting any positive reform within the system. And I think the government would need to also get to realize this. So you don't leave, have measure reforms and think that it will achieve the results. No, and you might actually leave the people worse than you met them if you're not able to go the whole hog of ensuring that policies are implemented not halfway, or half-measure policies are not introduced, but a full measure that must be thought through, diligently prosecuted, and constantly evaluated and monitored to be sure that those that are saddled with the responsibility of the implementation also are not either compromising it or deliberately sabotaging the reforms and the efforts.
Right. Let me just take us back a bit to the matter of the audacity that you said Emefiele kind of showed while he was still the CBN governor, and the kind of power he wielded. There are those who are questioning, how did he get to that point where it seemed like nobody could hold him to account for all of the actions he was taking?
Well, it is rather unfortunate, and I can remember my organization was compelled, and we're actually in court. So I can say for a fact that we've had more freedom of information requests to the CBN more than any other ministries, departments, and agencies of government in Nigeria so far. And many of these happened under Emefiele, number one. Number two, we've also instituted more legal actions than any other ministries, department, and agency, a single ministry, department, and agency than the CBN, because many of the activities of the CBN governor were completely shrouded in secrecy. There was the car park construction that was awarded to the Bullet Engineering Construction Company, which was a company that was connected with someone quite very close, late, I'll remember his name now, that was very connected with the president, the former president. So it was very good at doling out, favors, contracts, and also dollar exchange to every person that was considered to have mattered in that government. And that was how he was able to secure his activities in office. He was known to have used, the allocation of dollars, which was a situation where people don't even get to move out of their houses, but they can have money flowing into their account because dollars are allocated to them, and the same CBN under Emefiele with some of his contractors were able to also assist them in buying at the official rate from CBN and selling almost the same day to black marketers, and the difference is paid into their account. So billionaires were made without any company or any registered, enterprise, except the fact that Emefiele was able to allocate some of these resources to them. You could also remember how much of the Anchor Borrower Program that are yet to also, for quite a number of the amount of money that was involved in it, how that was also yet to be fully investigated and accounted for. I remember there was the allegation that also went to the National Assembly, where the Nigerian Agricultural Insurance Bank, insurance company, was completely ignored by Emefiele, and many of the agricultural support were rather, when there's a government established insurance company meant for the purpose of the agricultural sector, Emefiele was, through some of his cronies, friends, and families, were contracting the insurance of many of the supported agricultural program to private insurance companies at higher rates than what would have been with the government insurance, company for the agricultural sector. And quite a number of the parliamentarians were also gratified at every point that reports were taken to the National Assembly. Emefiele was able to get across to the leadership of the National Assembly as at that time, and some of the chairs of the committees, to ensure that those, reports, complaints, and petitions were never either investigated or even or also reports written on many of those investigations. And quite a number of the committee members were always, grumbling, dissatisfied, but unfortunately, everything boils down to either the leadership of the assembly or the chair of the committees saddled with the responsibility. So it was a regime of a CBN governor that was more corrupt than you can ever imagine in the history of Nigeria. And it had its fingers almost everywhere across the country, where he was doling out at the expense of the economy, at the expense of our scarce resources, and also at the expense of the sanity of the system. He was actually just compromising every compromisable, arm of government and persons in office.
So invariably, he didn't do this alone. He was aided by the system. Shouldn't we also be beaming our searchlight to some of these persons, calling them to question, holding them to account for the role they played as well?
Exactly. That was actually, I went the whole org of reading out on, and also without fear of contradiction, also mentioning some of those areas that needs to be investigated, including the courts, including some of the senior lawyers, who also were filing some of those actions for him, and including also the former chief of defense staff. Because if you remember, at the point when the DSS was going to also invite him over during the Buhari regime, where he was accused of, terrorist financing and the rest of that. It actually succeeded in using the military to provide, some measure of support, cover, and at the same time security for him to ensure that he was not taken in for interrogation by the DSS. So unfortunately, that was one of the, I've said this over time, it was one of the most disorganized governments that we've ever had in the history of Nigeria was under Buhari. So there was no coordination, and there was nobody that was taking, decisions. So it was a free-for-all government, and the whole discordance tune was consistently happening between ministers, ministries, aides, and the rest of that. So it was very possible and easy for the chief of defense staff to have provided that cover. That was never going to come, out of any form of altruistic concern for the military to have gone into this civilian territory of providing security for the CBN governor. So all those who have had reasons to provide some measure of, cover for Emefiele while in office. And those who actually failed to discharge their statutory duties must be questioned, and investigated for what must have actually been the influence for their omission or commission. And that's why I also expressed my fear for the capacity of the DSS to deal with that, because that actually is not their fortress area, and it is important that the right and appropriate agency are allowed to deal with.
Well, a lot of things actually happened, in the past administration, especially looking at the CBN, even where the former Minister of Finance said she was not even aware of the Naira recoloring. I decided to use the word recoloring because that's what people find conveniently to use. But then, Veronica and I, a little earlier, were talking about the current administration forming his cabinet and what should inform the character, the kind of people, the kind of personalities to be engaged, for these positions. What criteria do you think it's needed to be considered in selecting a suitable replacement for former Governor Emefiele? Will it be transparent and merit-based election process to ensure the appointment is, appointment of a qualified person for this role?
Yeah, I think it is very critical. If there's one thing that we can, at least for now, assume it is still going for this government is the capacity to, let me say, it is still the capacity and the display of his ability to actually do things differently. Meaning that, the government is able to deal with and take decisions that can be found to be sometimes not too really palatable, and that can be said to be in the collective interest of the country, and also changing the paradigm. So I would assume that the government would at this time understand the need for the appointment that would be based on merit, that would be based on the character of the person, that would not be subjected to any of the usual mundane and primordial consideration of either ethnicity or either religion, or the nepotism of familiarity with the appointing authority or appointing person. But rather it would be the pedigree of the person that would be occupying the position. And I think I would want to strongly also recommend that it is high time that we depart from the tradition that seems to be creeping into the appointment process of bringing people from the commercial bank to head the CBN. The CBN is supposed to be a regulatory agency over the commercial bank. And it is extremely difficult for you to bring someone who has been there in the commercial bank. If you go down the record and profile of many of the chief executives of the commercial banks in Nigeria, I can assure you with the proper investigation, less than 10% of them will stand the test of time in terms of checking with their integrity, checking also with their capacity to really discharge that responsibility in office, because the commercial bank in Nigeria have been more than, aid to, or even enablers to the corruption of many of the public office holders in the country. And majority of the bank officials are culpable in this whole exercise. So bringing them to CBN, just like was done with Emefiele, is almost just exposing them to a higher level of criminality. And we can only end up with what we ended up with Emefiele, if that is repeated again, to have someone from the commercial bank to come and hand the CBN.
Right. Now, one quick question that I'd like for you to address, perhaps in a minute or two, is the matter of how long it will take this government to clean up the rot in the system. It seems the government has set the ball rolling, but how long will it take for us to get to that destination we desire? Because Nigerians are eager to feel the impact of this current administration economically.
Yeah, I would say it would only take yesterday for the government to do that. So the government doesn't really have time at all. It doesn't really take time for the enemies of the system to regroup, and it takes a function of just, hurting the what I can say, the comfort zone of quite a number of those who are benefiting from the rot, to amalgamate forces and unleash their forces on the system or the reform attempts. Mind you, it is not only just the local, enemies that we're dealing with. There are also those international ones that would not want, Nigeria to actually transcend beyond the negative, image of the crisis that we have, the economic dependence on many of their own products, and at the same time also going and continuing in the borrowing line of living on the beggar's bowl. And that would mean that the government must understand this quite very well and clearly enough to really deal with the situation. The absence of, realizing this will end up as a flash in the pan. And that was why I made that point at the beginning, that, many of the currently appointed aides are not required just to be traveling around the places with the president. It's about them sitting down to understand the situation and proposing the necessary reforms and the implementation of them to make sure that the system is set on that needed, trajectory of changing what has been the practice.
And that's a fine place to leave this conversation. We must thank you, Chair HIDA Resource Center, Olanrewaju Suraju. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Right.